All right. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me. And thanks everybody for coming to the talk today. Today in the morning, I was thinking that I've given a few talks about language and migration because this is my research interest, and mainly about asylum seekers and refugees. And I was thinking in the morning that almost every time I give a talk that there is an event happening around asylum seekers and refugees. I'm sure you're aware of the missing 76 children from an asylum center recently. That's why it's important to talk about these issues, everybody in their place. My talk today will be about an important aspect of the asylum process in the UK, but also in other countries, in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, where language analysis of determination of origin takes place. I will explain what it is. I will also show some examples from the agencies that the Home Office contracts to do the language analysis. And I will also shed some light on my research. What is missing from research about language analysis for determination of origin is the voices of asylum seekers and refugees, how they feel in the interview itself, and also when they take the language test. So it's kind of a mix between, let's say, policy-oriented paper and inspired by also some research aspect to it. Oops, not working.
Use the key.
Okay, just use the pen. Oh, this word. Yeah. Thank you. So LADO, which I will use now as an acronym for language analysis for determination of origin, is used by immigration departments in different countries, as I said, in Europe. It started to take place in 1993. And the first countries to start using LADO are Sweden, Netherlands, Switzerland, and then other countries started to use the test itself, such as Belgium, the UK, Norway, Denmark, Canada. And it's mainly used to assist in identifying an asylum seeker's place of origin or nationality. So the underlying assumption for the use of LADO is that we can use speech, asylum seekers' speech, to falsify their claim about their place of origin, where they come from. So we use language as evidence to refute their application. And of course, as you can imagine, that there is a lot of criticism on the underlying assumption itself. And the most important criticism is that we cannot use language to assess the nationality of people. We could use language to determine the social localization of people, who they, for example, where they were brought up, what languages they were exposed to. Through language analysis, we could use this. But to determine the nationality of people, this is not the job of the linguist, because as I'm sure you are, probably you have friends who have, let's say, British citizenship. So they are British nationals, but maybe they're not able to use English language in the standard way of using English language by, for example, as it is received by English people. And this is the main criticism, because nationality, it's the relationship between, it's legal relationship between an individual and a state. And that does not mean it's related to the social localization of people. A lot of people might be born Americans and they could never, they can probably speak few words in English. Okay. Yeah. So the UK is a signatory of the 1951 Geneva Convention. It's Geneva Convention. It's convention that was signed by 145 states in order to recognize the rights of people to seek asylum after the Second World War. But this is, let's first take a look at the process of asylum in the UK. What happens? This is, of course, not related to the resettlement programs. When they bring, for example, Syrian refugees, when they bring Afghani refugees from their countries or from the neighboring countries of these countries, they go through completely different process. But we're talking about people who arrive here either legally or illegally and then apply for asylum. What happens is that when people feel that they have the right to apply for asylum, so they call the Home Office, or they might actually seek asylum from the port of entry, the airport or other ports. First of all, they are invited to take screening interview. In the screening interview, they take their biometrics, they take their photo, they ask them just simple main questions about why they seek asylum. After that, the journey of waiting starts. In the past, it used to be much less, especially for some nationalities. But nowadays, for all nationalities, the average is that it takes more than 2.5 years between this stage, the screening interview, and the main asylum interview. So that is waiting time. Sometimes they allow people, they give them permission to write, other times they do not. Now, where language takes place in this process. Now, after the screening interview, again, they wait, and then they are invited to the asylum interview. Sometimes the language analysis takes place on a different date than the asylum interview, but in most of the cases, the asylum interview and the language analysis are on the same day. And of course, what they say is that they invite people to take this test, the language test, only when they have doubts about the origin of the people. Let's say someone is applying that they come from Yemen, for example, but then they do not have any proof of identity to show that they are Yemeni nationals. Then in that case, they invite them to take language tests in order to assess whether they speak the Yemeni dialect or not. So LADO is not applied in all UK asylum cases. Approximately only 5% of the asylum cases go through LADO. So not everyone who applies for asylum has to take the test. Only 5%. But let's take a look. Use this. Let's take a look at where asylum seekers come from. So these are the top 10 nationalities of the asylum seekers to apply for asylum in the UK. So Iran, Iraq, Albania, Eritrea, Pakistan, Sudan, India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. Of course, this has changed last year because of the number of Afghani people who have been resettled to the UK. Now, the expectation, of course, is that people coming from these nationalities are more likely to be tested, taking into account the higher number of applicants from these nationalities. Now, I was involved with an investigation with the Guardian 2 years and a half ago to check whether people actually, or the Home Office applies LADO fairly across different nationalities, or whether it is done in a different way. Now, people coming from certain nationalities are more likely to be tested. So under the Freedom of Information, we applied for a Freedom of Information request to the Home Office to get this data because it was not all available. And then the top 5 nationalities receiving language tests between 2011 and 2018 are Syria, by far the largest one, and then Kuwait, Iran, Palestine, and Eritrea. 3 of the top nationalities that received the highest number of language analysis are not in the top 10 nationalities that apply for asylum. And if we remember that only 5%, approximately 5% of all applicants go through LADO. Now, between 2011 and 2018, 10,255 Syrians applied for asylum, according to the Home Office stats, meaning almost 40% of all applicants were tested. And this is way higher percentage than the average, which is 5%. Again, we're talking about Syrian nationals who came here to the UK, whether legally or illegally, but not through the resettlement program. Now, part of this investigation is that we interviewed people who went through LADO. So Ahmed and Zahra. Both Ahmed and Zahra are my friends. And Ahmed came to the UK from Dubai. He came to do MA in dentistry, and he's a practicing dentist now in the UK. Zahra also came here legally to do her MA in international development. The interesting thing is that Zahra came to the UK through Chevening Scholarship. And if you know Chevening Scholarship, it is funded by the Foreign Office, which means it is funded by the government. And then her documents have been checked by the British Council in Beirut. And that is why they issued visa on her passport. So her passport has already been verified. She has been verified as a Syrian national, the same with Ahmed, who came here also to study. Then the question is, why people like Ahmed and Zahra, who came here legally to the UK, and their documents have been already verified by the British government, and then the same government makes them go through LADO. Now, when we put everything in front of the Home Office about this and we asked for their response was very generic. So language analysis testing is just one piece of evidence used as part of the consideration process to ensure genuine refugees receive our support. It can provide a speedy resolution to claims by helping to confirm an asylum applicant's place of origin, and its use in immigration cases has been supported by the courts, including the Supreme Court. But they did not give any response to the cases, saying that they do not provide responses to individual cases. Now, This is from the Home Office website. Commenting on when the Home Office decides for people to go through LADO. So in different cases, such as when the applicant is unable to speak the primary language of their claimed region of origin to an adequate level, this is not true. Applicant's accent dialect is inconsistent with that of their claimed region of origin. This is actually the most interesting one to me. What decides who decides that, for example, the let's say people coming from Palestine, who decides that this is how Palestinians should speak, or any other country? So I'm just giving into different cases, but this is really true for all languages around the world. Now, who provides the LADO in the UK? So who does the test? Who does the analysis? LADO is provided in the UK by private suppliers. So around the world, there are mainly agencies, private agencies in 3 countries, in the Netherlands, Sweden, and Switzerland. And of course, there are some also private linguists who provide this to some other countries. But in the case of the UK, it is verified AB is the main supplier, with Sparta providing services in secondary capacity, where language analysis takes place via telephone interviews. Now, verified AB has been the main supplier since 2014. Before that, it was Sparta, and Sparta has been taken to a secondary capacity, not the main one, for one reason, is that a lot of lawyers and different immigration NGOs have started lobbying against Sparta because of the low quality reports that they produced. And then instead of just not using their services, they decided to use their services in secondary capacity. But this is, what I did is that I went to Verified AB website in order to check what qualifications they asked from the linguists and the language analysts who do the interview and the analysis of the test. So this is their criteria for employing language analysts: ability to identify different dialects of his or her own native tongue, good knowledge about and experience of the social, political, and cultural life in his or her home country, good oral and written communication skills in Swedish or English. Of course, because Verified AB is a Swedish company, the same for Sparta, and computer skills. What's striking here is that they do not ask for any qualification that is related to linguistics, not the basic one. So no diploma, no BA in linguistics or related fields, nothing. Just native speaker who might have been in Sweden for 20 years, who probably cannot identify a lot of new words that have been, because of course language and dialects are always evolving. So they might be detached from their home country for a long time. And in that case, how would they be able to decide whether this is actually how people speak in that dialect or not? And this is why we end up with what we call folk views or folk linguists. And this is, and there is a whole debate about, so in that case, do we actually employ trained linguists or native speakers? And a lot of people of course, say that native speakers should be employed and not trained linguists, and other people should say the opposite. But regardless of what, I will talk about this later on, about the criteria of the language analysts. But in its current form, in how they employ people now, there is a whole question about authenticity in terms of who decides what's authentic and what's not in the asylum seeker's speech. And authentic language can be considered language produced in authentic contexts by authentic speakers. But again, because I did my research on Syrian asylum seekers, so I will use the case of Syrian. But again, this is really true for all other nationalities, dialects, and varieties, language varieties. So what counts as an authentic Syrian or unauthentic Syrian? And also there is assumption of perfect monolingualism, that people speak one way and they do not use variations of language. We all know that people use different registers, different styles, sometimes different dialects, sometimes different varieties. And this is because of language accommodation, because people accommodate their language to create likeness. And sometimes people converge or diverge. We converge, meaning that we use similar language to our interlocutors in order to probably show in-group identity, in order to create likeness, in order to minimize the social distance. And at the same time, people also sometimes converge, meaning that they refuse to use that dialect or that variety, even though that they know it, in order not to be associated with that particular group. And this is now evidenced in research, could be done intentionally or unintentionally. It could be a conscious process and it could be a subconscious process as well. And one thing that is important here is that language analysts do not have access to the migration trajectory of the asylum seekers. And this is extremely important when we do language analysis, because we want to know where these people have gone, where they lived in their lives, what languages they were exposed to. And this might help us to say, oh, they actually use this word, which is typically associated with that variety because they lived in that place for an X number of years. But of course, they do not have access to this information. Now, there are different issues, legal issues and other issues. The first one, which is burden of proof. The burden of proof is actually not on the accused to provide proof. And then we have quantifying results. I will talk about this. And interview dynamics and power issues. Once again, when in Arabic, there are different, as all languages, there are different dialects, different accents, different varieties. And it is known also, it is a known fact that Arabic speakers are diglossic, meaning that they could use the high variety or the low variety. The high variety, which is the one used in media, in official correspondence, etc., and the low variety, which is the everyday spoken language. But also people, especially people living by the borders, let's say someone from Syria who lives by the borders with Iraq, they might actually speak the Iraqi and they might speak the Syrian, as it is kind of like, you know, let's say standard ones. Imagine that they bring an interviewer from Iraq or from Jordan, the neighboring countries of Syria. And then there is a Syrian asylum applicant. They might actually, if they hear the interviewer using Iraqi dialect, if they are exposed to the Iraqi dialect and they are familiar with it, most likely that they would use some words that are associated with the Iraqi variety. And this is because of language accommodation, because he or she might use this variety in order to create likeness, to show the person that, yes, we belong to the same group. That is why I know this dialect and I'm using this dialect. But then once they use it, it is used as a proof of deception that this person actually used Iraqi, not Syrian variety. This is a report produced by SparkLab. And the asylum seeker here claims to be from Kuwait. So they claim to come from Kuwait, and the report itself shows that the person actually used some words and sounds that are associated with the Egyptian dialect, not the Kuwaiti one. So this is an actual report by SparkLab. If you could see here, the report is heavily dependent on pronunciation. So they disregard all the other linguistic systems and they focus on pronunciation. And mainly, and we've seen this in a lot of reports, mainly they focus on words, individual words. They use this particular word, which is associated with that particular variety, and that is why we're refusing them. Now, let's take a look at this. He pronounced g instead of g. So what's the difference between the two? I mean, even a one, like, you know, even undergraduate people doing linguistics in their first year, they wouldn't write this. So how do they make a difference between the two? Of course, it's here about Gambina and Jambina. So it's clear. It's clear. The difference between the two is clear, and I can see what that analyst meant, but they're not even able to use phonemic transcription, which is basic. If you're really dependent on pronunciation, the least you could do as an analyst is to master phonemic transcription. Then over here, he pronounced L instead of G. And of course, this is completely different. It's about aluli, which means they said aluli. So it could be pronounced aluli or galuli. G. But then here, it's a glottal stop, which is a sound in Arabic. And it's completely different from the vowel. So this one, it's the vowel. It's not the glottal stop here. And we could, again, take any report and you will see these kinds of mistakes. And then this is what they are required to do now, the language analysts. They give them these are the scales. So quantifying, that is what I meant by quantifying scales. They give them a scale to the language analyst, and then they have to tick one of the boxes. The language analyst shows with certainty that the results obtained are clearly consistent with the linguistic community as stated in the hypothesis. So with all the shades, still, the language analysis shows with certainty that the results obtained are clearly inconsistent with the linguistic community as stated in the hypothesis. That means we have two hypotheses here. The first one, origin as stated by applicant, and the second one, applicant from Egypt, which means origin as not stated by the applicant. So in this case, in the case of the report that I showed you, most likely inconsistent with hypothesis one, which is Kuwait, because they claim to come from Kuwait, and more likely than not consistent with hypothesis two. But of course, these hypotheses bias the results, because that means we are put, like, you know, two hypotheses are put in front of the analyst, and that means all the other options are ruled out. And inconsistency are attempt of deception. So based on interviews with asylum seekers, lawyers, and a review of LADO reports produced by language analysis companies contracted with the Home Office, we found four main themes. The first one, language contact and change. The second one, practicing language for the test. And then the role of the analyst. And then feelings and attitudes towards LADO. Of course, for time issues, I will not be able to cover all of them. So I will talk mainly about the role of the analyst and the feelings and attitudes towards LADO, how asylum seekers feel about LADO. And of course, this is a part of a bigger research project about asylum seekers tracing their journey from their home country to the destination country, what happens on the way, and then when they are resettled. So I use interviews, field notes, observation, insider knowledge, and reviews of policies and reports. Now, the role of the analyst. Let's take a look at this. He said, we Syrians don't say gil instead of qil, as in the word qala. You said gal. He really provoked me. This is, of course, while speaking in the interview. He really provoked me, especially in the way he was speaking to me. He was intimidating, and every few moments, he says, in an annoying way. Then I told him, please, you ask me and I answer, then you do whatever you want. But please do not say, Then he stopped. And of course, all of the language analysis takes place on the phone. And approximately, it's between 10 to 20 minutes. But all of them are on the phone, and they ask them about different things. And of course, there are many issues also with how they ask and what they ask. The main thing is that most of the questions in the LADO, in the language analysis, are actually expected. So people can expect what they are going to be asked. And that means there is a danger of people who are really, who do not come from the country that they come from, to practice that dialect or that variety, and then they go prepared. And this is also reported in my research, where I interviewed people who claim to come from Syria, but they're not actually Syrian. And then they got the refugee status. And that is mainly because they practiced the Syrian variety. Of course, they speak Arabic. So they come from Arab countries, but not from Syria. And then they practiced because they knew the questions, or they expected the questions to be asked. So mainly the questions are about the holidays, what they do, what they do in, for example, the festivals, what they do in the festivals, their currency. They ask them about describing, for example, their neighborhood, etc. But how do asylum seekers feel about LADO. So these are some comments. I felt like a criminal in an interrogation session. That's Khalid. And then Dania said, I felt like a prisoner when I was talking in that closed room on the phone with someone who has a lot of power over my application and my fate. Other comments also revolved around how the system is open to abuse and the need for having a face-to-face interview rather than a phone interview. And I don't know if some people here study linguistics or study linguistics, but it is also a well-linguistic fact that anxiety changes language speech. And when people feel anxious, they do not produce language the way that when they feel comfortable. And that might prevent them from contributing fully in the interview. So if the general atmosphere is that people feel that they are actually interrogated rather than having a casual chat, since the purpose of the test itself is to elicit naturally occurring data. So first of all, the types of questions need to be changed, but most importantly is that the atmosphere needs to be non-threatening.
The population that you take the interview are the population who got the status or the population who don't have the status.
Sorry, say that again.
Do you know when you make the interview? Okay, so you ask the questions from what population? Who are your what's it called? Your group that you're asking your research. Are the people the asylum seekers who already got status, or are the asylum seekers who are in the process of getting
both?
Both. Yeah. And what is the time of the people arrive? It is important, as you said, the anxiety and the depression can change the field because it's a long journey route, and 80% of the people.
Shall we? Because save the questions to the end, because Mohammed has now only 5 minutes to finish. And yeah, save the question. We'll get there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. And language analysts. So based on that, we wrote some recommendations, which is actually in line also with the guidelines that were produced by linguists in 2004 and were endorsed only by Switzerland. So language analysts must be trained linguists, but that does not mean trained linguists who are not native speakers. So we support the argument that language analysts must be native speakers who are also trained linguists. And of course, especially now with the refugee wave, there is a lot of course, asylum seekers and refugees who have different degrees related to linguistics or linguistics. Changing the forms of questions and the questions themselves helps to avoid high percentage of reduction. Creating a non-threatening environment in the interview aids asylum seekers to participate fully in the interview, and employing the current refugees to cover LADO's demands. So now we come to the main question, whether LADO works. Does it work? In my opinion, in its current form, of course, there are a lot of pitfalls in the system. And this goes both ways, by the way. It goes on the way against asylum seekers, but also against if the purpose of the Home Office is to use this as a gatekeeper. A lot of people also use this in order to abuse the system and get a refugee status when they claim to come from a country that they actually are not from. So thank you very much.
Clarification questions, quick clarification questions before going to Elena's talk.
Yeah, can I finish my sentence where I started?
Yeah.
You know the population that you asked about that you take interviews, And as you know, the whole language from giving asylum seekers, the process of question and whole routine is socially constructed. Beside the fact, asylum seekers are suffering from that root, from a lot of depressions.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's a lot of stress. Life matters, what they had and the future they had, what the future they're gonna go, and the way the systems is being designed, what people they're gonna take or not take.
Yeah.
So how can you, on that base, what percentage would you say the actual language is come from the routine of what they are trying to explain? Because you said the depression and anxiety will affect the tone, obviously, their natural behavior, and when their natural behavior changes, obviously, they change the state of mind and the change of whole language. So how can you find out the clarity of what they are saying or not saying?
Okay, so you're asking about like the percentage of the language that changed. Of course, I do not know the percentage. That is mainly because I do not have access to the interview itself to assess systematically. But again, what really now we're living in a world of migration and mobility, and that means when people migrate, it's not only them, it is the languages, it is the cultures, it is the language varieties, etc. And that means we're living in super diverse communities where there are really no lines, clear-cut lines between dialects and between varieties. It's fluid use of the language. This is reality now, that language analysts and these companies are not really embracing when they do the analysis. Most importantly is that they refuse applicants with producing reports as short as this, meaning that we really don't need percentage. Or analysts need just a few words here and there from a perceived variety that is not the variety as claimed to be from the country of origin in order to refuse applicants.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria, for inviting me to act as a discussant today. Thank you, Mohammed, for this really engaging presentation. So basically for today, I thought that I will structure my talk partially responding to what you just said and partially trying to link what you said to my field, which is not linguistics, but is migration. And trying to build a bridge with regards to language in terms of work that I have done on pre-entry tests and the extent to which national narratives influence policies that then end up in restricting family migration. So to start with the response to your talk, I think that the climate of distrust that you talk about really evokes something that is much more recent compared to LADO. You said that LADO started in 1993, and since 2013 in the UK, there is this policy or set of policy since Theresa May was at the Home Office that is being called the hostile environment. And the hostile environment, as you can see from the definition here, is a set of policies where Theresa May basically said that she wanted to make the life of illegal migrants unbearably difficult. Okay, and these type of policies are now felt very much in the fields of housing, policing, education, for instance, but also healthcare, with effects that go beyond migrants who don't possess papers. In migration studies, we like to say illegalized migrants rather than saying illegal migrants, because it's the system that makes them illegal, because there are no safe routes to asylum, or also because at times people lose the status when they are already here. For instance, they come with a student visa, and then the student visa expires, they don't have the papers, and they become illegalized. Okay, and so what you said that your participants reported when they had to undergo LADO, and they said feeling like a prisoner because of the type of these strategies to create this climate of discomfort for asylum seeker, really reminded me of the approach that I try to use in my work by trying to use methods of collecting data that aim to create a safe space in order not to re-traumatize people who are likely to have had really traumatic experiences in their home country. And because we know that the ways in which the Home Office conducts this type of interrogation and testing can be very much re-traumatizing. So using arts-based methodologies or participatory methodologies is really conducive to create a safe space where migrants are put in the situation, or other marginalized groups for that matter, to actually disclose only what they feel comfortable in disclosing, rather than having a direct interrogation that risks to create the same effects of what you were talking about. Also, with regards to language, more specifically, language is a pillar of integration, and according to the famous definition of Strang in 2008, language is seen as a facilitator, because the pillars of integration are employment, education, housing, and health. And you might see language as a type of cultural integration, which links with projects that I've been involved with, European projects, promoting sustainable policies for integration, that involve countries such as the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria. At a time in 2011, when language testing was introduced as compulsory for family migrants. And this pre-entry testing and language testing was considered a sort of externalization of border, because the test needed to be carried out in the country of origin before the actual migration. And this kind of pre-admission test was really a convergence of policies that happened across Europe. So not just in the countries that we studied as part of this project, also in Scandinavian countries, for instance, and in France, in addition to these countries. And according to an article that we published and I co-authored in 2015 for international migration, so these English language requirements were really seen as a way to overcome a potential ghettoization and under-achievement of these groups. In a climate of post-multiculturalism, those groups are not by chance Muslim populations that have been perceived and framed in public discourses as particularly problematic. Right, so, and particularly women who were seen as the spouses coming to the UK, according to the KZ policy review on integration, adding a generation for each generation, because they are looking at Bangladeshi and Pakistani spouses who are coming to join their spouses. Right. So it's quite, then as part of this project, we try to identify which were these dominant toxic narratives that were pointing at, especially, at the Muslim populations as particularly problematic. And that led to the attempt of implementing this language test with the aim of actually trying to prevent so many people from coming, right? And these dominant narratives really are developed along these lines. The first one could be is that Muslim people are inherently anti-modern subjects because the type of practices that they have that are incompatible with British values, for instance, or other European values more broadly. That, for instance, Muslim women are victims in their own culture because they cannot oppose the patriarchal practices that characterize their culture and religion. That, for instance, especially Muslim women, so again targeting specifically women, are unfit for parenting future generations because they are the mothers and the educators of those Asian British people who actually then don't perform as well as this type of kind of discourses seem to suggest. And also very much a consequence of what happened in 2001 with the riots that then changed the whole integration discourse in the UK and shifted it away from multiculturalism towards other terms such as social cohesion, for instance. This perception that Asian Muslim populations are living parallel lives and that they are therefore dangerous. And that they contribute also to social spatial segregation in British society, like the Casey Review in 2016 has really much said once again. And here is quite interesting because in 2016, David Cameron had invested quite a lot of money in the English proficiency of Muslim women, and the Muslim community perceived it as an attempt to stigmatize their communities. And they weren't really, they didn't really react very well to this attempt to invest or to suggest that Muslim women's ability to speak English is poor. So I wanted to conclude with this report on marriage, migration and integration conducted in 2016, because I think it's quite important to make the point that it is through thorough and accurate academic research that you can go and debunk these assumptions and toxic narratives that depict migrants in certain ways. And in this fascinating report on marriage migration, the scholars have really tried to contrast these narratives by arguing that actually migrant wives tend to be underemployed because of the life course that they have when they come here. Of course, they come here to marry, so they are likely to have children, and so they are likely not to be employed. That also migrant wives are not always uneducated. In fact, quite the opposite. Is interesting to also observe that since they introduced the fluency test on language, assuming that most of these women are uneducated and often illiterate, if you look at the statistics, the statistics haven't really curbed the amount of spouses who have come in around 2011 when this testing was introduced. Also, there are other, ways to debunk these toxic narratives that you can see from this slide. For instance, the fact that very often, when you think about belonging and types of identification, one can retain the belonging to their country of origin, but that doesn't exclude that a person of migrant origin might develop other forms of belonging to the receiving country, for instance. Also, they also proved with this research that migrant women tend to be quite active in their communities. So really debunking a set of stereotypes that that were raised before some restrictive policies in family migration were implemented. So in conclusion, I just wanted to highlight once again that there are some media and societal discourses that have an inevitable impact on migration policies, and this was evident in the convergence that happened in Europe around this specific type of legislation that I just talked about. And also that academic research is very important in debunking negative discourses and policies. So thank you for listening.